The first rule of our place is simple. The land remembers, and the fence has a voice. People from the manicured side of the ridge think a ranch is just a scenic backdrop for their paperwork. They don't hear the wire's low hum that says what we shouldn't need to yell. That morning the sky was a hard, polished blue that made the power line sing like a tuning fork. A black SUV had nosed so close to our hot strand you could measure the space with a dime. The plate wore the gated name Sage Hollow Meadows like a cufflink. The bumper promised a neighborhood's pride. Out here it looked like a tuxedo thrown into a branding pan. Granddad let the steam rise off his coffee before he spoke. If they think this lane is open parking, he said, quiet as a warning, they're gonna learn how a boundary sounds. I'd already heard the wrong kind of tires at dawn, the kind that belonged to certainty, not neighbors. By the time I stepped onto the porch, he'd settled into the old chair he claims is older than my impatience. Boots planted, still as a fence post, patient as weather. We got company fast, heels on rock, the rhythm section of trouble. A woman in a storm-gray blazer came marching, eyes grading our house like a failed test. "Good morning," she said the way an alarm clock says it. "This vehicle is here on official business. We'll remove it shortly." Granddad didn't gift her his gaze. Another slow sip. "Official business on private ground," he said. "That a new brand of law." He tipped his chin at the bright yellow sign with a lightning bolt we've kept on that line since forever. The wire behind it throbbed a lazy, lawful hum. "I'm Lydia Crane," she announced, smile attached like a staple. "President of the Sage Hollow Meadows HOA. Your gate appears to obstruct visibility for a community access easement. Our safety officer needed to park to document the obstruction. This is evidence storage." Granddad turned just enough to size up the SUV like he sizes a bull. Is it clever, mean, or both? "Evidence storage," he echoed, friendly as rust. "That why it's 2 inches from a live fence." She cut the wire a dismissive glance, then waved at 500 acres of pasture. That is exactly none of her business. "I'm sure your line is de-energized while we're here, giving complaints about distressed animals." "I don't take orders from emails," Granddad said. "Barely take 'em from people. Usually I play interpreter between stubborn head and stubborn policy. But Lydia's the sort who only hears her own voice." "We'll remove the SUV after our inspection," she decreed. "Move your gate to align with the HOA apron. I'll send notice." She pivoted like she'd fixed a county and walked back to a sedan idling by the road. 2 men in reflective vests watched from inside, wearing authority like a rented costume. She left in a spray of gravel that tried to reach our boots and failed. Silence reset the place. A hawk skimmed the cottonwoods. The regulator clicked. Cattle drifted like slow clouds. Granddad set his mug on the chair arm and stood with that deliberate rise that looks like wisdom because it's just steady practicality. "You're thinking," I said, which in our family means this might become a Thanksgiving story. "I'm thinking they parked close enough to smell the irons," he said. "Insulated tires are cute. Those metal step rails, a hand loves them. A hand loves ground." He patted the Charger. Not to hurt, just to adjust perspective. He fetched copper wire, split-loom tubing, and insulated gloves, the same kit he uses to fix fence or correct a skunk's address. I had a pocket full of questions, legal, moral, sheriff-shaped, but he worked like weather, steady, unapologetic, on time. The tester chirped a code-legal number, memorable without being mean. He ran copper through the loom, tucked it along the underbody where a thoughtless hand would grab beneath the step, and made the whole thing look like factory guts. "Not welding anybody to a door, right?" I said, aiming my tone somewhere between citizen and grandkid who prefer not to testify. "Won't even scratch a lesson," he said, and sipped. He wasn't done. He wiped a trail cam lens, fed it new batteries, and mounted it on our side with a perfect view. "For the record," he said, "people carry stories. I like facts." The sequel arrived quick. Lydia's sedan returned in a ribbon of dust. She parked too close, snapped for the vest crew. "We're retrieving our property. Do not interfere." "Interfere," Granddad said. "I'm sitting." Vest 1 approached the driver's door with more caution than his boss, read the warning, glanced at Lydia, and, because pride is louder than reading, grabbed the handle. The pop was crisp, like a smart bee with good aim. He yanked his hand back and stared at the metal like it had betrayed him. "This is exactly what I warned you about." Lydia snapped at us. "You modified your fence to harm people." "Oh," Granddad said to the horizon, "you modified your parking to harm yourself." Vest 2 crouched, peeked under the rail, and recoiled like a rattler winked. "There's wiring under here." "Perfect," Lydia pounced. "That's all we need for the sheriff." Granddad flicked a small remote. The trail cam winked red. "And I've got all I need for the sheriff." She made a call in a voice carefully staged for future playback. "Sheriff's on his way," she declared. We heard a different engine first. A tow truck. Chain-speaking fluent consequence. A man in a sun-bleach cap, Walt's recovery, stepped down and assessed like he'd been hired to hold common sense back into the picture. Sheriff Colton Dawes rolled in behind him, leaned on a fender with the posture of a man whose coffee's still hot at the office, and took it all in with one even glance. "Which one of you is paying me to get yelled at today?" Walt asked. "Private property," Dawes said, tapping his ticket book. "An authorized vehicle. Tow it." "This vehicle belongs to a homeowners association in good standing," Lydia said, voice climbing 2 stairs at a time. "It's part of an ongoing compliance operation." Walt looked at the sticker, then the fence. "You parked your operation on a live line. That's a choice." "It's evidence storage," she insisted. "Evidence of what?" Walt asked, polite as a porcupine. "A gate?" she said, and even she heard how hollow it was, because she glanced to the sheriff for rescue. Dawes didn't throw a rope. He ran the plate and came back with the patient tone old lawmen use when the next sentence will rearrange furniture. "Lease to Sage Hollow Meadows HOA. Primary contact, Treasurer Miles Hart. Secondary, President Lydia Elaine Crane. Registration hold for unresolved county tax lands. That accurate, Ms. Crane." "There must be a clerical error," she said, and a seam opened in her voice. "Could be," Dawes said, "or you bought more car than budget." Walt slid dollies under the tires like a man who's done quiet math for decades. "Hands off metal till I've got rubber under everything," he told the vest crew with a grin that wasn't friendly. A county compliance officer named Keene arrived in time to measure what mattered. Granddad's meter chirped a legal number. The trail cam scrolled still that showed everything except Granddad trespassing under anything he didn't own. "From what I see," Keene said, even as a level, vehicle entered the active zone of a lawful fence and made contact. No evidence of targeted harm. He closed the folder. "We're done." "On paper, maybe. In town, story beat statute. By afternoon, our neighbor Boone, everyone's Uncle Boone, related to no one, rolled by with a thermos of sweet tea and gossip. Sage Hollow porches had already posted clip videos. Slow-mo at the exact moment Vest 1 grabbed the handle. Red arrow, caption consequences. "Your fence is internet famous," Boone wheezed. That night a voicemail from the taller vest, Nate Potter, landed. He sounded like a man whose conscience finally found his mouth. Could he stop by in daylight? No, Lydia. Just talk. Granddad agreed under porch rules. No surprises, no shadows, and we won't be upset if the sheriff drifts through. Nate arrived out of uniform and sat like the chair might buck. He slid printed emails across. Dates, names, bullet points bolded by people who love Tona. Lydia had pushed for external enforcement visibility with new assets and uniform presence to pressure recalcitrant landowners. Treasurer Miles warned about budget exposure and filings. The line that nailed the board to the wall read, "They'll fold when they see badges in a big truck." Sheriff Dawes eased in mid-conversation, took copies, and nodded like a puzzle finally found at corner pieces. "Freelancing authority with uniforms and vehicles," he said. "That's tap dancing on thin ice." He personally tagged the impounded SUV later, our small-town neon that reads, "Not over." Evening brought an emergency meeting at Sage Hollow's Glass and Stone Clubhouse, designed to feel modern, landing closer to chilled showroom. We stewed in back in our dust. Lydia warmed up the old numbers, safety, standards, harmony, adjacent rural-urban interfaces, and for a moment you could feel the room wanting to believe. Then Treasurer Miles Hart took the MIC looking like a man who's argued with Excel since 3 a.m. He didn't perform, he reported. A community service charge, no bylaws recognized. A private LLC, Sage Asset Partners, that smelled like a pass-through for patrol costs. An SUV lease payment outpacing collected dues. Drafted liens on families who miss fees, without votes. He didn't accuse. He placed numbers beside choices. Rooms like that don't explode, they deflate. Chairs creaked as people leaned away from the podium they'd leaned toward for years. 2 nights later, Lydia tried a softer door. She came alone at dusk in a plain white blouse with a paper sack and a smile fit for campaign season diners. Neighbor to neighbor, she said, lifting the bag. Blueberry muffins. I came to talk. No boards. No bylaws. Food's fine, Granddad said, resting on a post. Peace ought to last longer than breakfast. She flipped strategies like flashcards. I lost the vote. Miles is auditing. The board pretending nothing's wrong and I'm out. But out isn't always permanent. People forget. I just need the videos to stop spreading. We can make things easier for you. No more inspections. No more letters about your gate. You help it fade. We let you be. Tempting the way cold water is after a week of dust. Refreshing, but with a price. Peace with conditions isn't peace, Granddad said. It's a lease. I don't rent my land or my principles. She held his eyes long enough to understand the only thing she'd win here was a story she couldn't direct. She set the bag outside the gate like it could do the talking and drove off, not angry now, just calculating. Sheriff Dawes rolled through later, heard the play-by-play, and chuckled without smiling. She's planting the idea that she's reasonable, he said, so when she moves again, she can say you refuse a compromise. Days settled. Ridge breathing again. Sage Hollow drivers passed slower, some with small apologetic waves. We heard, we're sorry, we're learning how to be neighbors, not passengers. The impounded SUV wore a crisp invoice under its wiper like a white flag. The audit kept finding creative accounting, which in towns like ours means your reputation's about to pay for a while. Each evening we logged traffic and weather. Granddad wrote the same last line, what the fence had to say. I didn't get it until the crickets grew loud and the week clicked shut. A good fence is more than a barrier. It's a sentence. You either respect it or argue with it. But either way, you hear it. Sometimes I still spot Lydia's sedan on the county road. Once she slowed enough to look our way. Once she stared ahead like we were a billboard she refused to read. People like that don't vanish. They regroup, repaint, hunt soft ground. But here, the line hums. That hum is promise, warning, comfort. A week after the tow, Uncle Boone brought his grandson. The boy wanted to hear the fence. Granddad did the old cowboy trick. A long blade of grass, touch metal with plant, not skin. Feel the tiny, safe snap. The kid laughed like a secret had accepted him. You know you're a legend now, right? Boone grinned. Folks called the day the fence bit back. Granddad tipped his hat and looked across the field where cattle drifted to water and sunlight poured honey over rough edges until even the memory of the SUV looked like a lesson instead of a fight. Most think fences keep things out, he said to the distance. Truth is, they remind folks what's theirs and what isn't. The good ones don't just stand. They speak. I didn't love that hum because it embarrassed anyone, or because it earned slow-mo edits and a breath of internet fame. I loved it because something in me settled. I've always been the reflex peacemaker, the kid translating between hard heads and soft hearts, the adult believing a pot of coffee might fix ancestral grudges. If you're lucky, you learn pieces in the absence of conflict. It's the presence of agreed lines. The day that SUV kissed our wire, the fence said what we didn't need to shout. Here your rules end, and ours begin. The week after the tow felt like a drawn breath. Folks from over the ridge drove slower. A few lifted tentative fingers in apology. The audit kept peeling wallpaper off the HOA's tidy story, unvoted fees, a pass-through company for patrol spending, a lease larger than the Jews, and liens drafted like scarecrows. What the sheriff couldn't say publicly, the arithmetic said plainly. Nate came back with updates. He wasn't wearing a vest this time either, just work jeans and a look like sleep hadn't found him yet. He'd resigned after the meeting and found a job out by the grain elevators. I can't be the muscle for someone else's theater, he said, then added softer. I'm sorry about your morning. Granddad nodded. Your morning's better now. The trail cam footage had flown farther than we expected. Porch clips from Sage Hollow became edits on neighborhood pages, then short videos on feeds with too many exclamation points. Most were predictable: red circles, arrows, text that shouted consequences. A few were thoughtful, residents asking how a volunteer board got itself uniformed and motorpooled. Miles, suddenly popular, posted spreadsheets and bylaw excerpts with the stubborn humility of a man who'd rather be anonymous. Lydia went quiet for 3 days, then returned in careful interviews about misunderstandings and temporary turbulence. She mentioned her muffins. Dawes stopped by midweek for coffee. He doesn't like to be recorded saying policy, so he visited as a neighbor. "I don't get to police hurt feelings," he said. "I do get to police badges that aren't ours, vehicles bought on funds that aren't approved, and paperwork that pretends to be authority." He glanced at the fence. "I like a boundary that does its job without needing a sermon." I asked him if the SUV will be released soon. He shrugged. "County gets paid, paperwork gets righted, liens get resolved. That's the order." Meanwhile, Astoria is walking around town making choices for people who haven't made them yet. That Friday, Sage Hollow held another meeting, this one led by Miles, an attempt parliamentarian who liked the sound of gavel taps. We listened from the back again. Motions, seconds, votes. The board dissolved Sage Asset Partners by unanimous consent. They capped any equipment lease over a modest threshold unless approved at a general meeting. They suspended compliance patrols indefinitely. There were no cheers, just the sound of a room deciding to be boring on purpose. Sometimes that's what safety feels like. On our side of the fence, life returned to chores. We oiled hinges, rolled wire, matched ear tags to entries in the log. Granddad let me do the notes one evening. When I reached his favorite line, what the fence had to say, I paused. What did it say today? He looked at the horizon where the cottonwoods hold the last light like they are saving it. It said nothing, and that was a point. Saturday brought a different visitor. A schoolteacher from Sage Hollow knocked at our gate with a handful of kids. Civics Club, apparently. They were studying local governance and rural interfaces, which is a long phrase for learning how not to annoy your neighbors. We showed them the warning sign, the regulator, how the ground rod worked, why posted boundaries are communication before their enforcement. Granddad let one kid try the blade of grass trick. The tiny snap earned a chorus of delighted yelps. The teacher asked whether we regretted making the video public. We didn't, I said. It made itself public. We just kept our own record. The kids wrote that down. It felt like the right sentence to leave them with. By the next week, Lydia's sedan passed twice without turning. Rumor said she'd been voted out pending the audit, though votes in gated places acquire and lose weight in strange ways. She tried a letter to the editor about healing conversations, then a community podcast where she repeated the word collaboration until it felt like a door-to-door salesman. People were polite online. The numbers were less polite. A month later, the SUV left the impound after fees, interest, and something the clerk described as lessons learned. Walt, never theatrical, said only rubber first when he watched them load it. Dawes signed the release with the same gravel-dry voice he uses for everything and went back to work. Meanwhile, our evening stayed the same. 2 chairs, 1 ledger, day-old coffee that tastes like the first pot. We wrote down who waved, who avoided eye contact, who finally stopped to ask how the fence worked. A contractor from Sage Hollow came by to borrow post hole tips and left with a list he said he'd share with the board. When in doubt, knock if you need to document something. Stay off the wire. Most problems shrink if you start with a handshake instead of a letter. Uncle Boone visited again with his grandson in a paper sack that actually held muffins. No conditions, he said, just carbs. We ate them on the porch while the kid asked if fences have favorite songs. Granddad answered that fences only sing one tune, this far, but the tempo changes depending on who's listening. Does the HOA hate you now? The boy asked, blunt the way only kids are. Granddad scratched his cheek and smiled with half his mouth. Son, we're not important enough to hate. We're just a boundary that didn't move when someone pushed. News cycles moved on. Porch cams caught dogs doing acrobatics, a thunderhead stacked over the ridge, a lost peacock strutting down a cul-de-sac like it paid the mortgage. Our clip settled into the archive labeled local drama we learned from. Every so often a new comment would nudge it back to life. A rancher in another county, a cul-de-sac dad who'd been fined for lawn height, a librarian who quietly explained the difference between authority and paperwork. We never answered every comment, but we answered a few with the only advice we had. Post your signs, keep records, make your choices clean, let the fence hum for you. If somebody shows up with muffins and strings attached, remember rent comes due. One evening, near the edge of summer, Lydia finally turned down our lane again. No blazer, no camera. She stopped at the gate and raised an open hand. We didn't come down. She didn't ask us to. Audit's wrapping, she called across the fence. I'm not returning to the board. I hope you return to the neighborhood, I said, surprising myself. She looked at the wire, then at the posture it protects from speeches. I'm working on that, she said, voice smaller than before, and drove away without dust. After she left, Granddad wrote a longer note in the log than usual. I watched him think with a pencil. What did the fence say today? I asked. He tapped the page. It said the same thing it's always said. Folks finally listened. We closed the book and let the crickets have the last word.